So this is the sticky notes lecture on Chapter 7, Environmental Policy. And the chapter starts with a case study on fracking that takes place in Pennsylvania and Ohio. We will talk more about fracking in Chapter 19, but we'll discuss it here. So this case study kind of explains the drilling process for natural gas. This has been pretty controversial and in a lot of the news reports. They even made a documentary movie called Gasland about it. So if you want to watch more, you can learn about it. And it's a lot of people learn about how their tap water is actually getting contaminated with methane because of the drilling, and people's farm animals are dying or losing their hair. So it's an interesting documentary to watch. So here's the big region they're talking about in this case study about fracking. As you can see, it's through Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and even upstate New York. All right, the fancy name for fracking is hydraulic fracturing. And this is the way we drill for natural gas, which is the cleanest fossil fuel. We can also drill for petroleum this way. Positives about it. It keeps the prices of natural gas low doing fracking. It reduces coal use, which is the dirtiest of the fossil fuels. It employs people, and they basically pay the landowners a decent amount of money in order to drill for the natural gas that they find trapped in rocks underneath, in the shale underneath their property. Seems like a win-win in that case. Unfortunately, there's a lot of negatives. It's exempted from the NEPA and the Safe Drinking Water Act. So this means that the damage that is done is not actually accounted for within these two different acts. Chemicals and gas has been found in well water. So if you ever do watch the Gasland, you can actually see people lighting their faucet water on fire because of all the gas that's in it. There's also issues with radioactive waste. Earthquakes can happen because of all the drilling. This was famous in Oklahoma. And unfortunately, the companies that do this drilling or the fracking don't disclose the chemicals used. So as you can see here, that these negatives are actually kind of concerning in terms of people's health and the well-being of your property and the animals in the area that are living there. So that's a big thing. And as I said before, it's exempted from NEPA, so they don't have to do an environmental impact statement. So they don't have to figure out what the negative repercussions could be, which seems silly, but for some reason it is exempted. Okay. All right, on this page you have this lovely image of fracking. Make sure that you study it, read through the caption. It goes through the entire process, the steps. As you can see here, a well is drilled, goes down past the aquifer, deep into the soil, gets into the shale formation. The pressure releases the gas, as you can see here, and so forth. So just go over that. Okay. In this chapter, we talk again about tragedy of commons. So Garrett Hardin, and it's basically talking about the unregulated use of a resource which leads to depletion. Here are more examples of commons in case you forget from earlier this year. Rangeland for cattle grazing, the oceans for food, air, water, forest for lumber. They also provide us clean air, water, and recreations. Big solutions to depletion. Regulations such as laws, quotas, limits, we have to set this so that we don't overuse or abuse these commons or these resources. So just a little review on that fact for you. So I'm just going to skip a couple pages. All right. So the big thing you need to know about in environmental policy is the three waves of environmental policy. So the first one was in the 1860s to 1900. And basically this part of this policy was protecting the environment. It's not about protecting the environment. It was about conquering the nature. It was all about going west expanding, and this is when like laws like the Homestead Act and the Minerals Lands Act and the Timber Culture Act were developed, because it was all about people going out west to California and discovering what our country had to offer. So just remember that the first wave had nothing to do about saving the environment. It was all about finding new resources and things we could do out west. Okay. And just a little feedback, the Timber Culture Act is all about saying that we were allowed to cut trees. We had no idea that we could destroy them. We thought it was infinite. And so we decided it was a great idea to expand our power in the United States, but we did a lot of damage to the environment because of these acts, just because we had no idea how much damage we would cause. All right, the second wave of environmental policy up first is that you need to know about Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. She wrote about DDT, which had a lot of environmental policies kind of started because of this in terms of the health effects and the environmental effects that DDT had. This was part of the reason why our bald eagles started to go extinct. This is where we tried to mitigate or fix the problems of the first wave, and this is when we started to establish national parks, wildlife refuges, and forest reserves. We also tried to preserve whatever we had left. We realized that things were not infinite. All right. The third wave, which is modern times, this is where the Clean Water Act started, a Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act. We realized like we have a problem with pollution, and also we have to protect our species. All right. If you look at this picture here, this is Ohio, and a lot of rivers in our country, unfortunately, are so polluted that with oil and waste that they can literally catch on fire. And this is when, because of this one specifically in Ohio, this is the reason why Congress finally stepped up and passed acts and laws against this and polluting, because it's kind of crazy to see water, as you can see, lit on fire in these massive fires. So that's what started it. All right, so a few laws that you need to know. The NEPA Act, all right, and its provisions. So just remember that your environmental impact statements are part of NEPA, all right, and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and what its role is. And its role is to enforce laws that Congress passes, all right. So if you're going to use public lands or public funds, you have to prepare an environmental impact statement. And then you also need to know what the EPA will enforce the NEPA. Okay. So don't mix these two up. Agency, law. It's a big thing that you have to make sure that you know. Okay. So your book does this nice little like timeline of important laws. You don't need to know the years. You just need names and exact kind of like what that they do. All right. So you just need to know like the Clean Air Act. It sets standards for air quality, restricts emissions, things like that. Your Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA as it's called, abbreviated. Safe Drinking Water Act. Different than the Clean Water Act. This is for our surface waters. This is for our actual drinking water. And then CERCLA, which is Superfund. This is the cleanup of crazy hazardous waste populations. And unfortunately, we've lost so much funding for this project. Okay. Let's skip. All right. So green taxes and subsidies. Make sure that you know that subsidy is basically a tax break or tax credit or a resource for free. This is the way the government kind of promotes certain things in order to get people to do things. So they'll actually fund certain things. So it makes products artificially cheap. So taxes pay. So sometimes things are cheaper. For example, in New Jersey, gas has always been relatively cheaper, and that's because we subsidize the price because we do all of the refinery here in New Jersey, so that's why ours is considerably cheaper than others. Other big thing, corn. Our government has been subsidizing corn for years, including wheat and soy. This is why when we get into the food meat, we'll talk more about it, that we have so many things made out of high fructose corn syrup, and everything's corn-based, and that's because the government subsidized the corn production in this country, so we have an excess amount of corn. So we had to figure out what to do with it all since they were paying for it. Coal is subsidized, roads for logging is subsidized, so the government will actually pay for the roads and maintenance of them so that we can get to trees easier. And solar panels in California are actually subsidized because California has such an air pollution problem. They are basically subsidizing the cost of solar panels, which are very expensive at the beginning. All right. Cap and trade. Is known as unmarkable emissions permits, but everyone calls them cap and trade. So basically, this is the way companies reduce their pollution. We set a law that says in the Clean Air Act that you can only emit 2 tons of a chemical in an hour from your coal plant. And let's say there's 10 units of pollution, but this company only uses 5, then it can sell or trade those other credits that they have to another company. So that's the big thing. However, if another company is polluting more than 10, they can buy those extra credits so that they still fall through with the regulations of a maximum of 10 units of pollution. Okay. And cap and trade is related to Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and it's supposed to help us reduce greenhouse gases. And that is it for Chapter 7.